So first of all, we don't need to disprove, they need to prove, and so far they have no proof. Now, on the other hand, I can go into some detail as to what the contrary evidence is. Should I go ahead and do that now?
Yes, David ji. If you could tell us about, some of these so-called things that are cited by people who propagate these things, and it would be good to sort of settle that for once and for all.
Well, going back to my own experience, when I studied the Rig Veda, I cataloged over 150 references to the ocean. And these are people who supposedly didn't know the ocean. 7 rivers flowing into the sea, 2 or 4 oceans, ships across the sea, rishis connected to the sea, Varuna, Brigu, deities associated to the sea, most of the deities. Indra releases the 7 rivers to flow in the sea. Varuna, the deity of the ocean. So huge maritime symbolism in the Vedic text. That's where I knew something was fundamentally wrong. And then the great geological rediscovery of the Saraswati River in India through the Geological Survey of India. There are now hundreds of studies showing that a river did exist. Most of the ancient sites, Harappan, pre-Harappan, are on the dried banks of the Saraswati, which began to dry up perhaps 5,000 years ago, and by 4,000 years ago was largely dried up. Mahabharata mentions the drying up of the Saraswati River. So the river is also showing, and it flows, Saraswati flows through Kurukshetra. It flows through the heartland of India. Vedas are written on Saraswati. So the geology of the rivers supports that the Vedic people were in India for many thousands of years. And you can switch linguistics if you want, but you can't move geology so easily. And archaeological continuity, there were shifts of the population in India when the Saraswati dried up from the northwest, a little bit more towards the Ganga. But there was no outside intrusion of people from Central Asia. And then more specifically, recently, we have more the genetic evidence. And genetic evidence shows a continuity of the same populations in India going back for 5,000 years, and almost no influence of steppe people or people from Central Asia, whether in the so-called Aryan Invasion period or even later. So we don't have a genetic record for people from the outside. We have a genetic record of a continuity of civilization along with the archaeological record. And not only a genetic record of people, but of animals. The Brahma bull or zebu, we find has a genetic trace in Italy as long as 8,000 years ago. Indian animals were moving out, and they were probably then, of course, moving out with the population. India had a horse, but the Indian horse with 34 ribs is more connected to the Arabian horse, not the 36-ribbed Central Asian horse. Oldest chariots in the world found in Sonali recently, 4,000 years ago, copper in India, not far from Delhi, Indraprastha. So on that level as well. And again, we see the same basic populations in India and continuity of practices. For example, Harappan, pre-Harappan, so-called Indus Valley civilization has lots of fire altars, water tanks, people leaves, even swastika as emblems, even Lord Shiva. So we see a continuity of civilization. So we must have a continuity, at least of major languages. India, as a huge subcontinent, is going to have a variety of languages, not just one. But that doesn't mean that it has to have only one. And I always tell people that most people in the ancient world spoke more than one language, just as people did today. So we cannot identify people linguistically, ethnically, as if it's a simple identification there. Then I want to raise a broader point, India versus Europe. First of all, there is no continent of Europe. Europe is an idea. What do I mean by that? The Pontic steppes north of the Black Sea, the Ukraine, has always been an open highway to Asia, specifically to India. For example, even 2,000 years ago, we had the Scythian population. We had Indo-Scythians in the Punjab, but we had Scythians as far as the Danube. And we had many cultures, even later, Mongols, Turks, that went as far as the Danube through Central Asia. So open highway of communication was there. So there is plenty of ground for Indian influence, even through Silk Trail and other things through the West. So we don't have to pretend that India was isolated or had to borrow. And India represents the largest, oldest of the Sanskritic, Indo-European cultures, you want to say. For example, languages like Slavic are less, we can't trace them more than 2,000 years, even German, hardly 2,000 years, even Latin languages, Greek a little bit older. But the idea that European languages are much older than India has no actual record. The Indic civilization is older, and even linguistics came from India. So we see a continuity of civilization in India in terms of genetics, in terms of populations, in terms of agriculture, in terms of religion. So there's no need to separate language from that either. And most of the place names in India, North India particularly, they're all purely Sanskritic. They're not borrowed. Saraswati, Ganga, Sarayu, a lot of these are mentioned in Rig Veda as well. So that is a kind of overview of the Aryan theory. No one talks about invasion today. They're talking about migration. But again, they haven't found any record. So they're saying a small migration that perhaps we can't find. But if that is the case, its influence should be very small. Another example I want to give you is by the 6th or 7th century BC, we find Brahmi in as far as Sri Lanka. Over 2,000 years ago, we find Indian influence in Indonesia. So clearly, it was a vast civilization that moved far. It wasn't this intrusion from the northwest.
Namaste. We hope you enjoyed this Chitti Media content. Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.